Hello again. We are here at the Kirtland Hills Walking Trail. As you can see, I'm the only car in the very small parking lot. Which again brings me to the two reasons why I love it here, maybe three. The fact that I'm the only one here, so that gives me some quietude. And it's sort of a really hot sunny day, and this trail is mostly in the shade as you go through the trees, which is actually really awesome because I used to want a place just like this when I would walk my dog Coco, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. I really liked places like this where you didn't have to walk in the direct sunlight. As much as I love the sun, it can get a little intense, and also this camera I'm using can overheat. It did that once in the sun, so there's a number of, and plus third reason is I just love it here. It's beautiful, and a new trail within the last year. I think this is the first summer I've seen this here, so a lot of reasons to like coming here. There's a police officer that was sitting at the entrance when I pulled in, I think getting ready to catch some people speeding. I heard a siren go off a little bit ago, so thankfully I wasn't speeding on my way in here or committing any other infraction. So yeah, let's just go for a walk. Start here. It's 2 p.m. well, maybe about 2:15 p.m. I had every intention of coming out this morning early and going for a walk, but my day got complicated and I ended up going down several paths that I didn't plan on, some that I do plan on, which are just taking care of all the animals that I have in my household. It took me a long time today, but there was a job that I actually liked where I had all these rusted tools that my father had given me years ago. He was a pipe fitter at Chase Brass, which no longer exists. Before that, Diamond Shamrock in Paynesville, and he had a lot of tools, a lot of pipe wrenches, adjustable wrenches, that sort of thing, and I had them in this toolbox that I used. I am no plumber, I am no expert at anything, I do what I can. I've used these tools occasionally when I've needed to, but rarely, and every time I do, I dreaded it because they were all rusted to heck. And every time I would use them, my hand would get rusted, and I finally figured out how to clean the rust off them by immersing them in vinegar. Very basic. I was happy to learn this. I'm a late bloomer sometimes when it comes to learning things. I'm sure this is obvious to most people who use tools regularly, but I am not one of those people. I use them when I have to fix something occasionally, and I just had to fix our dishwasher the other day, putting in a new heating element and a new thermostat, again, which I found out how to do on YouTube thanks to technology. And in the process, I pulled out this is like my plumber's toolbox, and it had all these rusted tools in it. And I remembered every time how I don't like these tools being rusted, but then for some reason I put them back in the toolbox, and out of sight, out of mind. I don't really worry about them until the next time I have a small plumbing job that I feel I can handle. And I just, lately for some reason, I've been remembering things that I've been putting off doing and trying to do them. Trying to not procrastinate as much as maybe I have in the past. Maybe bring a little more order to my life, if you want to look at it that way. And this is one of those things. And so I was like, I'm just gonna do this thing. I'm gonna clean these tools. My dad would be proud. The fact that, I was almost gonna toss them. I was almost gonna toss them and go buy new tools, or at least go to garage sales and see what I could find. But then I realized those would probably be rusted too and would need some sort of care, but these were neglected. I didn't know how to prevent the rust, which now I do by rubbing them with mineral oil, and I never did such a thing. I never really kept them, you know, clean or dry or anything. I'm just sort of a superficial tool user, you know, grab them, use them, pop them back in, and so it feels kind of good to bring more order to my collection of tools. So anyways, it worked like a charm. These were terribly rusted. I mean, the tools were completely brown and flaky and yucky. Popped them in a little pan filled with vinegar. I had maybe 7 tools that were like this. I have another batch sitting in vinegar right now that I didn't notice before, a hammer and some other tools. Now that I'm seeing now that I've solved the problem, I'm seeing more tools that need the solution. And so I'm trying to clear through and just, you know, get a little more organized. I always enjoy fixing things. When I can. You know, I realize when something goes beyond my expertise, ability, and, you know, I can learn new things, but sometimes if it's way too complicated, I'm not interested. That's when I help somebody out by paying the experts. But I'm learning more, doing more odds and end jobs here and there. So anyways, I soaked these tools in vinegar overnight. Came out this morning and the water was all yucky and cloudy and bubbly from the acetic acid, you know, which eats away at the rust. Poured it down the drain in my garage and got black crap all over my hands, which wasn't fun. You know, normal things. Just dealt with them all one problem at a time, and eventually rinsed them off. Used baking soda to neutralize the acid. You have to do that, like rinsing in water and baking soda, otherwise you'll get what do they call it, flash rusting from the acid. So I did all that, cleaned them off, and one of the wrenches was actually stuck and I had to spray a little WD-40 in there, and that worked like a charm at loosening the adjustable wrench. The screw was, you couldn't turn it. There's no way. I banged it with a hammer, tried everything I could to force it to open. Almost tossed that big wrench. It was a big adjustable wrench, really nice wrench, but I thought it was gone. And yet I restored that as well by spraying a little WD-40 in there, let it sit maybe 20 minutes, came back later, and it worked like a charm. I was able to loosen it up and then open it and close it perfectly, and it gives me a great sense of satisfaction to fix things, to bring order back to things, you know. And I think it's actually real. It's also metaphorical. I mean, I really do just like fixing things that are broken, but I think it's also metaphorical in the sense that we all probably need some fixing, you know, of some kind or another. And I'm not talking about self-improvement or anything like that, but seeing the disorder in our lives, and then when you see that disorder, you know, things happen. And I would say a lot of the reason why I didn't really clean these tools properly or restore them is I didn't really pay attention to it before. You know, I did other things, I pull them out, I put it back. So it was attention that kind of brought, you know, bringing my attention to these issues that solved the problem. You know, I saw the problem for what it was, and maybe before ignored it, thinking it wasn't that big of a problem. This time I got it working pretty well, and the tools look pretty nice and shiny. I might actually throw a picture in of the tools in the video, because I'm just so proud of the job I did, which was nothing but just, I mean, it took time. You know, it took time to do all this, and then you have to scrape it with a metal brush. Like once you pull them out of the vinegar and you neutralize the acid with the baking soda and rinse them thoroughly, I use the metal brush to like scrape the rest off, because it's still kind of black and it doesn't have the luster, you know, that it originally had. There were directions on how, if you really wanted to, you could use a fine grain steel wool to polish it up. I'm like, they look good enough. You know, at this point I was like, there's no rust, I kind of like, it's kind of like a black matte look to them, and that was fine by me. So I guess, I don't know, I'm going on and on about tools here, but I guess this is the reason that I didn't get out here earlier today. I just had something to do, and it was fun. I mean, I had fun doing it, and got some sense of satisfaction by doing it, and also knowing that I'll have now a nice clean set of tools for the next job that I do. Kind of put my mind in order, you know, a little more order today, and I'm glad that I did, because now, you know, I can think about other things or go for a walk, which, you know, all day I was like, oh, I hope I get out. You know, I don't like it necessarily on days that I am not able to get out and walk, because this is what I love doing, and it really grounds me for the rest of the day, for the rest of my life. I mean, whatever. It's really cool. I love getting out, and these days are beautiful. I mean, Ohio, it's difficult to live here, I would say. We have very harsh winters. I mean, not as harsh as Canada or something, right? But pretty darn harsh. And where we live by the lake, we get a lot of lake effect snow coming in off the Lake Erie, and it can be tough. I mean, digging yourself out, shoveling snow off the deck and the driveway, and just, you know, that is a whole nightmare all of its own, which you'll probably hear endlessly about if I continue doing this in the winter. And then all winter long you dream of springtime and summertime and being able to walk in the woods again. And I get out and walk even in the winter and enjoy that for its own reasons. You know, it's kind of nice. There's a different silence and quiet to winter. I mean, it's like everything's sleeping, but waiting, you know, hibernating, like not dead, you know, in sort of a stasis, a suspended animation state, which is always amazing to me, that everything is so bleak and dark in the winter, but then here we are once again, right? It's like a rebirth of everything. Not the same. I mean, these are all different plants, but same species, same type, same, you know, however this occurs, which I don't question a lot of it. I don't dig into the details of it, but just to know that, like, every year life comes back from the bleakest, darkest, coldest winter. It's a great reminder, I think, of restoration and restoring ourselves. You know, every year in some sense we restore ourselves, rejuvenate ourselves after these winters, and then that gives itself a sense of satisfaction, just like restoring the tools, you know, restoring ourselves back to working order, which that phrase has come up several times in our discussions. But what a wonderful trail this is. Just so nice and green and peaceful. I can hear the road, but it is what it is. The noise is there, and it needs to be acknowledged. Can't make it go away. So beyond that, I guess I hadn't put a tremendous amount of thought. There were two things I did think of talking about, and one was, actually I need to pull out my phone here to get a reference, because I did, in yesterday's talk, we talked about decisions and how we have this illusion, I would say, of making decisions. That somehow there's a decision maker inside of us that's controlling things, pulling the shots, right? The conscious observer, the conscious controller, you know, who is aware of things and says, you know, I'm going to make myself do certain things, right? So we have this perception of this controller, and even science is picking away at this and questioning the idea of free will, I guess you could say. and maybe, and I guess maybe we can talk about this. I would say the illusion of free will. And some may say, wow, that's a pretty big stretch. But I've looked into this and into myself, into my own mind, to see, do I really think I am making decisions or controlling things, or is stuff just happening? And then the mind sort of explains it after the fact, right? Or has an illusion of control. Because to summarize the experiment, let me pull this out. And I mean, we don't need to talk about science. We can just observe. But sometimes it's useful to hear that science, in many ways, is discovering parts of the truth. And this one study, there's a number of studies, but this one is sort of a landmark study. It's called the Hannes Predictive Study in 2008. And in that study, the researchers used fMRI scans to watch participants' brain activity as they decided whether to press a button with their left or right hand. I was right about the left or right hand yesterday. The team could predict the subject's decisions up to 7 seconds before the participants consciously decided to press the button. And this was an article in Psychology Today that discussed this study. There were other studies too, and you can get at these by searching for studies that look at decisions. I don't remember exactly what I searched for to find this article, but there's another study that was in 2019 called the UNSW Imagination Study, where researchers at the Future Minds Lab demonstrated that free choices about what to think could be predicted from patterns of brain activity 11 seconds before the subjects consciously chose what to imagine. And then there's an older experiment in the 80s called the Libet experiment, L-I-B-E-T. This foundational study by Benjamin Libet measured the readiness potential, the brain activity preceding movement, and found it occurred about 300 milliseconds before a person reported the conscious intention to act. And then there was another study in 2013 called the Abstract Decision Making, published in PNAS. Researchers expanded this concept beyond simple motor movements by asking participants to make quick decisions about abstract math. They successfully predicted decision outcomes up to 4 seconds prior to conscious awareness. And so this is very interesting. These are just some that came back from a search this morning about what neuroscience is understanding. So people do study the brain scientifically. We can observe our own brain and observe the brain of others, and I think in that observation learn much more directly. But what these studies are showing is that, especially the original Hannes study that I mentioned, is that there's activity occurring in the brain that essentially can be used to predict, but ahead of time, what somebody is going to decide to do, even when they think they've made that conscious decision. Now, I haven't pulled out the study, I don't know what's happening, but what's interesting is when we think we've made the decision, right, when we think we consciously have decided something, or when we're about to decide, right? So we reach the point where we think we've made this decision. It's after the decision has already been made, right? If brain activity can be used to predict the decision, that means essentially the decision's already been made before you consciously think you've made the decision. I mean, this is really groundbreaking in a lot of ways, because what it's showing is the brain is just acting, right? The brain, as we've talked about many times, is like a machine. It's a conditioned machine and that thoughts are conditioned responses, conditioned reactions to memory, which the brain is essentially a memory storage device, amongst other things, but it stores memories, and then thought are reactions to those stored memories that are initiated either through sensory input or through its own internal input, right? The brain itself, the mind, is like another sense, you know, in a way. You know, you can see things with your eyes closed, like your brain has activity, but still could be regarded as another sense, you know, mind consciousness in the Buddhist way of looking at things. So all this sensory input reacts with the memory stored in our brain, produce new actions, right? New thoughts, right? And we could say thoughts are these reactions to memory, which is what the scientists are measuring, right? They're measuring the brain activity, which is the thinking, right? This is another good sign that thinking occurs in the brain. I've actually had people not believe that, you know, that don't believe that the brain is where we think. And I guess you can believe whatever you want, but even this is measurable, right? You can measure brain activity, you can relate it to actions and decisions and say, yes, the brain is the thinking organ, the organ that thinks in certain animals that have brains. Trees don't have brains, but a lot of animals do, and it's where thought occurs. So, but what's really interesting, right, is just to go back to that if thinking is occurring in the brain, but are we deluding ourselves by thinking we have free will, by thinking that there's some, let's call it the soul, right? Because what else is it? I mean, where is it if it's not, like, what part of the brain does it sit? You know, like, where would this decision maker be? This is when you start trying to find this decision maker, right? You can't find it. I mean, I guess don't take my word for it. Look for the decision maker. Try to find the decision maker separately from thoughts, or the thinker separate from thoughts. That there's, what, a little guy with little levers and knobs somewhere sitting inside your brain, pulling these levers to make decisions. You know, it doesn't really work that way. And even the science shows it doesn't work that way. That the brain just acts. The brain reacts to phenomena, to stimuli, to sensory input. But then, and this was interesting, because when the studies showed that when the decision was believed to be made by the conscious mind, which we could say is, we think we make the decision and then take action. But what's being seen is the actions occurring before we have that illusion of making the decision. I mean, the decision's already been made. The action's already happening. The brain is acting on its own, right? Of its own accord. It doesn't need you. It doesn't need that this idea of the me controlling things. Is the brain's laughing at that, right? It's not really happening. You're not really controlling things. You think you are. You think you're making these decisions, but you're not really, right? And you need to observe this in your own mind, because me saying this isn't gonna change a thing, and you'll just go back to believing in free will, which this is very much related to free will, right? If you think about what do we think free will is, and it's a foundational concept in Christianity, right? That you are capable of making decisions. That God gave you free will, right? And you can choose good or you can choose evil, and what you choose determines whether you go to heaven or hell. I mean, if that is essentially one interpretation of Christianity and what it teaches. So be good. There's commandments. Actually, this is something I wanted to get to, commandments and ethics. I hope I do later in this video, or I'll create another one later, because I started thinking about this morning as well. The rules of ethics, right? And rules to live by, you might say. And I'll throw a little sidebar in here, because it's very much related to this idea of free will, that if we think we have free will and the ability to make decisions, then there's some judgment process going on, right? Judging our actions and saying, well, you better make the right decision. Since it's free, you're free to choose A or B or C or D, and some of those actions are good according to a set of rules we'll call ethics, and some of those actions are bad. Let's use the 10 Commandments as the measuring stick for the moment. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not dishonor thy mother and thy father, keep the Sabbath day holy, use the Lord's name in vain. I still remember quite a few of these. I don't know, I probably didn't get 10. But you know them, you can look them up. I did find one very interesting, and I could talk about this probably on its own. Thou shalt not kill was the way I remember that commandment being taught to us in Catholic school. And even in searching for this, I came across that people say thou shalt, that there's a different interpretation of this, that says thou shalt not murder rather than thou shalt not kill. And I saw this even this morning as I was reading through, you know, finding the 10 Commandments. Just I remember, you know, that my memory served me right. And the first sort of image or search result that I got, that commandment was thou shalt not murder. And I'm like, well, that's a little different than what I remember. I remember thou shalt not kill, which is actually why I always had a problem with this, because I was like, oh, how could people be fighting wars, you know, fighting wars against each other if one of their religious commandments is thou shalt not kill, and then you're doing all this killing, you're violating your own commandment. How can you, but that's your identity, right? You believe those commandments. Christians, everybody, which I took seriously, right? When we said thou shalt not kill is okay, that's very clear. So thou shalt not kill, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I take that to apply to animals, to humans, to really anything. Like not taking life of any kind that isn't necessary, right? But there is a nuance, and you know, necessary being like, you know, obviously I'm a vegetarian, so I eat vegetables, and one could say you're killing those vegetables, right? And you are, I guess, to some extent, right, to eat, but and I won't get into that right now. It could be a whole nother discussion. But this distinction between murder and killing, there is a distinction. Like, and if you look it up, the murder is sort of the, you could say, unlawful, right? Unlawful taking of life, or intentional, unlawful, maybe even selfish, right? Based off, you know, some selfish motive. Whereas killing could be justified. You could have justified killing. And I'm not advocating this, I'm just sort of stating what the difference can be seen as. And I think this is how people rationalize war. But again, decisions here, right? Are we making these decisions, or are they just happening? Because one way of looking at this is, you could take that commandment very literally and say, well, then no one ever should kill anything, right? Seems very clear. Well, then, of course, how are we going to fight the wars that we like to fight? We have to come up with some justification or reason. You know, we can't say that, because, you know, then we won't be able to fight wars anymore. So choosing the word murder rather than killing, and I do think if you go back to the original Hebrew, it more or less is murder than killing, and there is a distinction there. And I think this is how they rationalize all the wars that are occurring, right? It's okay to kill as long as someone says it's okay. But see, this is where you really have to get at it. Well, who says it's okay, and why? And that's where ethics can come in, right? And this started me down this trail where I was going to talk today about this, because I found it really, you know, I was going to actually, and maybe I'll have another video where I was going to say how was I going to put it? Not the failure of ethics, but the, I can't even remember the term that I was going to use. Let me see if I can remember. 'Cause I like the phrase. I'm looking through some notes that I made. Probably wasting time here. I am wasting time. Let's not worry about the particular word. Maybe it'll come to me. But the futility. I think maybe this is the futility of ethics. That coming up with a set of rules to live by, and then saying live by these rules. 10 commandments are a set of rules, right? Live by these rules. Then you have to, like, everything has to fit within those rules. But those rules are incomplete. They don't discuss every situation. They don't cover, how do you interpret that? Right? And here again, justified war, you can come up with ideas about, well, killing's okay under these circumstances and not okay under these circumstances. Well, says who? Again, it's like the 10 Commandments don't say that. They don't give you more advice on when it's okay and when it's not okay. And then, so sometimes people, you know, they expand upon things, right? Write additional documents, I mean, this happens in Buddhism, this happens in Hinduism, maybe to some extent in Christianity, I don't know. But where you try to clarify that, right? Expound upon that, write essays about it. When an action is good or bad or whatever, you can end up in a rabbit hole where you can't possibly come up with every situation, right, where you would have to make a decision as to right and wrong based on those codes of ethics, you could say, because it's just impossible, because no number of words, we've gone into this 1,000 times, right? No matter how well intentioned a code of ethics is, it's never complete, never covers everything, never covers every scenario, never can tell you what to do in all situations. So what do you can drive yourself crazy trying to, like, figure out how to apply those rules of ethics. So there are no complete code of ethics. So we can put it that way. There's no complete code of ethics, which is the futility of ethics as far as I'm concerned, because you can't codify it. You can't come up with a set of rules. That is not to say one should be unethical, right? Or one should not be good, right? I've used these words as well. What it's saying is words cannot be used to define it. You can't define good and evil in terms of something that's partial and incomplete, or ethical behavior. One should live a good life and an ethical life, not one based on codified ethics, though, right? And then one may say, well, but you have to have that. You must have a code of ethics, or how are we going to know what's right unless somebody tells me what's right? This is the conundrum, but it's actually not that hard to understand when one understands that goodness and love can come from places other than words. You know, there's a way to see what's good directly. There's that intelligence, that direct intelligence. You know, love and compassion has its own intelligence, right? And so when we end the thinking mind, in some sense, right, it's not that there's nothing, right? There is nothing, in a sense, but in that nothingness is, you know, I want to say love and compassion, right? But again, that's the idea of love and compassion, that there can be something that can guide us and our actions that is not based in thought. And I'm not talking about supernatural entities here either. It's the intelligence that is there when your thinking ends. When this thinking that we're talking about, which is brain activity, right? This brain activity is driving us again in some autonomous way that we can't don't really have control over, because this idea of we is just another thought, right? You have to understand that. If you don't understand who you are and who these thoughts are, and who is this thinker that you think you are, or this controller, decision maker, however you want to look at it, as long as you think that that decision maker is real, that decision maker is there, then you create all sorts of conflict for yourself. Because that decision maker, that thinker, is your ego, is the center of you. But it's a bundle of thoughts. It's a construct of the mind. And that construct of mind needs codes of ethics to live by, because it doesn't understand truth directly. So it says, well, I want to do what I want to do. I want to live a selfish life, and I want my desires to be met, and I want there's certain things I don't like, and I don't want those. I want certain things, and I don't want other things. I desire, seek pleasure, all that. But at the same time, for whatever reason, wants to live a good life, as long as it doesn't interfere with that, the seeking of pleasure and desire and all that, right? And that creates the conflict, because if one just observed one's own behavior and observed the disorder in one's life and saw that, there's no need for ethics, there's no need for codes, there's no need for anything else, because a clear mind, a mind operating from intelligence, not from thought, but intelligence that comes from love and compassion, can never make a wrong decision. Well, there's no decision to make, right? That's the other clear thing to see, that there aren't these decisions that we think there are, right? To get back to the neuroscience part of it. Because if you really understand that, understand how the brain works, how the nature and structure of thought, which comes from the brain, understand that process, not just through science, although it can be helpful, but understand it by observing it. Be aware of the process of thought in your own mind. No one needs to teach you this, right? There's no teaching. So there's no need for a teacher, there's no need for a guru, other than to say, look for yourself. Look for yourself and see how the brain works, and decisions, and this idea of free will, and all of this, like learn. Not learn by accumulating knowledge, learn by observing. Then consider these free will, all that goes away, because when you see it, the truth, that's not the truth, right? And then it's not a matter of conflict, right? Because as long as you hold on to this yourself, this notion of yourself as being the most important thing in the universe, which is also absurd. You know, I thought of an ant I saw, as I was changing the water in my cat's bowls this morning, I saw a little ant hiding behind one of the bowls. And, you know, I put the bowl back down, and I kind of tried to use the bowl to hide the ant, because there's cats in our basement that, you know, if they see an ant or anything like that, their instinct is just to destroy it, right? Eat it, kill it, whatever. They don't even think twice. That's their nature, right? Their brain tells them this. And maybe humans have, you know, maybe there's something different about humans. I don't know if there's something different about humans or not that allows us to see the ant as just as valid as us. Right? Not something to just be killed or destroyed or eaten, but, you know, when I saw that ant, I'm like, that ant is a living creature on this planet just like me. We both deserve to live in our own way. There's no reason to take the life of that ant, or any other insect for that matter. I don't kill spiders, I don't do anything. I try to remove them from my home in a jar or something, but why kill them? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's not compassion, right? It's not like, aren't I doing something good by not killing that spider? Because that again is the ego stroking itself for being so good for not killing something, right? It's not that, because if that's the motivation, it's still the self operating. It's just seeing that spider just seeing the truth of that we're all life on this planet, equally deserving of life. Like there's a harmony of all living things, and one living thing does not have any higher place in that harmony than another. That if you see that equality, not again as a concept or idea of equality, but the actual equality of all living things on this planet being together, harmoniously living, then there's no need or reason to kill that creature, right? And I don't care whether it's a commandment or not. It doesn't matter. There's no need for it to be a commandment or not a commandment. The right thing to do is just evident, and it's not a decision to be made. Oh, should I or shouldn't I kill that ant? You just don't. There's no need to do it. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And you could think your way, though, into all sorts of scenarios where you feel you must kill that ant, right? Rationalize your way and say, well, again, the commandment is only murder. This is killing a creature that's, lesser than me. So it's okay, right? You can justify murder or justify, killing other animals to eat them because they're lesser than you. Are they lesser than you? I mean, this is the thing. It's not like, again, if you don't eat animals, which I don't, think about it as, well, I'm being good to these animals, I'm saving these animals. I don't see the distinction. I just don't have a desire at all to kill those animals. And I can live perfectly fine without doing it. And I don't need, again, it's pleasure seeking often, right? People eat meat because, well, it tastes good, I like it. It's pleasure. So your pleasure is more important than the life of another living thing. I mean, you've made that decision, I guess, right? Or you think you have. And what you're really doing is just following your own, say, animal instincts without observing what's happening, questioning it, right? Observing it. Do I need to do that? And this is where the intelligence of love and compassion can come in, because it just doesn't need to do that. People can survive without killing animals. And so why do we need to do it? Other than pleasure seeking. If we're pleasure seeking, we do all sorts of things, right? And pleasure seeking leads to a lot of behaviors that, some people take pleasure in killing. And, a serial killer, right, probably takes pleasure in all the kills that he or she makes, and sees it as fine for the same reason that people might kill animals. And again, if you try to justify this through ethics, you say, well, an animal is lesser than a human, so it's okay to kill the animal, but I don't understand why people kill humans, right? You can say, well, I wouldn't kill a human, but I'll kill an animal because I get pleasure from it by eating it. But I won't kill a human. But some people probably get pleasure by killing humans, and they see it the same as killing an animal. Well, another human is not me, so it's okay, right? So see, you can rationalize, and this is the danger of ethics, because the danger of this partial rationalization is you can come to any conclusion you want through words. You can have your own philosophy, your own word-created belief system that justifies yourself being a serial killer just as much as someone eating animals, or whatever the case may be. And I'm not judging the eating of animals or anything like that, but I'm just saying that when you're aware the harm of ethics, the harm of rules, living by a set of rules, because you can come up with any rules you want to achieve any outcome you want. Again, you're driven by desire. You don't want to give up your life of pleasure. So you justify your life of pleasure with a set of rules, and then be yourself satisfied with yourself at living it with that set of rules, right? At least I have a set of rules to live by, as if somehow that makes it okay to come up with justifications. And I've seen these arguments with people, right, who argue about, say, eating meat. And I'll just stick to that. I'm only, because it's convenient. Again, this is not a judgment, because it's just being aware of what's happening, right? Being aware of the reality of the situation. And saying, you know, I don't know, whatever, they'll come up with whatever rationalization is okay. It's normally that, well, I have to kill something to survive. And they will make an equivalency between killing carrots and killing a cow, right? And I mean, we can see quite a bit of a difference between a carrot and a cow, right? And again, I'm not going to make a rule between, you know, well, okay, what is the difference? Because again, then whatever rule I create, you can always find a way around it. You can always just say, well, I want some other rule, right? And that's not what it's about. But it's about that, yes, to survive in this world, we need to eat something. But I think when you just see it as like, it's not a black and white thing, right? You can eat very simple things that don't feel pain, you know, that don't have brains, that don't have the same awareness, right? And you can think of it from awareness, right? That everything has awareness, even the carrot. But that to survive, can we do the least harm? But again, that's not a rule. I don't want to say there's a rule of least harm, because then now there's another rule. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of what it is. Can we live in this life? Can we live this life in a good way that does the least harm to others and to other creatures, and maybe provide help and benefit to other creatures, right? But not make it a rule. Can we just find the intelligence of love and compassion that allows that to happen? Not through rules, but through just awareness of what's going on, awareness of our disorder in our lives. And so again, this idea of free will, to just jump back to that, I guess we're combining a lot of what I wanted to talk about together, and it just naturally wove a tapestry, you know, here, because things are connected, right? Our idea of free will is very much connected to codes of ethics, you know, and the judgment that comes from that, you know, that is sort of how we intertwine these. Because if we didn't have free will, you know, all of, say, Christianity and even Judaism, right, and probably, I don't know so much about Hinduism and that, but would all kind of fall apart, because it's all based on this idea of judgment. You are judged. And I can't, I'm not going to speak for Judaism, because I guess I don't know. I was raised Christian, so I can speak that there's definitely a judgment. There's definitely a sense that you have free will. God gave you free will, I think, is how it's phrased. And what you do with that will determine whether you'll end up in heaven or hell. I mean, this is simplistic, but I mean, this is essentially what is happening, right? And so you better make the right decisions, right? But then it sets up eternal conflict in yourself, because you don't want to make those right decisions. You're pleasure seeking, right? And even your religion is a pleasure seeking, because you are suffering because of impermanence in your life. You're suffering because of the thought of ending, and you want a solution to that, rather than just seeing the reality of impermanence, that you are impermanent and that you will end, and all the thoughts and your body and everything you own and possess and desire for will end. That is a truth. I think if you don't deny that truth and you see that truth, then there's no need for any other comfort, right? Because the truth is what it is. The suffering comes from not wanting to accept the truth, not wanting to see the truth, wanting to live in delusion. The delusion of permanence, the delusion of that I have a permanent existence, which does not jive with what you observe. Everything you observe changes and dies, and you know, even the tools that I restored today were on a natural course of decay. You know, all conditioned things decay. These are Buddha's last words as he was dying. All conditioned things decay. Strive on with diligence. Right? That I don't remember the Pali words for that. His last words, you know, on this earth, could have said anything, but he chose to remind everybody of impermanence, the conditions are impermanence, right? Conditioned things. He also said this is because that is, right? This is not because that is not. The arising and, I'm not quoting word for word here, but the arising and falling of things is all a dependent process. There's something called dependent origination in Buddhism, which is a whole study of causality, right? That everything has a cause. All conditioned things have causes, and that if you find the causes, you can affect the outcomes, right? Which is what science is all about, studying the causes of things, right? In science, you could say Buddha was very much into understanding causality, the basis of science, some 2,600 years ago, right? He understood conditioned things. What he also understood was to go beyond that, right? Can you understand, how do you go beyond the conditioning? Because our mind is a conditioned thing, and the mind will end. The brain will end. And that will end certainly upon death of this organism. And we've already said the brain, we've studied the brain in many ways and understand that thinking and who I think I am is in the brain, right? The brain contains this idea of me. So this idea of me will decay and die when this body dies. There's a relationship between the mind and the body. The brain is a physical thing. Thinking occurs in a physical thing. Thinking is a mechanical process like anything else, and thinking will end. And this me, this image you have of yourself, will end along with the brain. Accept it. See that. And then when you see that, then you see the silliness of all the actions to preserve what cannot be preserved, to make permanent what can never be permanent. It's not possible. So see the truth. And in the seeing of that truth, the suffering ends, because there is no longer a conflict between your desire to be permanent, for absolute security, which does not exist, to be secure in an insecure world. Rather than that, security is the seeing of insecurity. Security, the only form of security is the seeing that there is no security. That insecurity is the law of the land. Impermanence, that all things change, conditioned things, means there is nothing permanent, because everything has a cause, and anything that has a cause is conditioned, and anything that's conditioned will decay. Therefore there is no permanency. See it. It's a scientific truth as well as a religious truth, right? A philosophical truth. Truth is truth. But see the truth completely. To see it completely means it applies to you as well. You don't say, well, everything around me is conditioned, but I'm somehow going to survive. I'll go on, right? I will persist. There's some part of me, my soul, will continue in another life, another body, or in heaven, or someplace else. That's where it breaks down. You don't want to see the truth of your own impermanence. Memento Mori. The Romans actually had a phrase, Memento Mori, which means remember death, or also remember that you will die. Like live by knowing you will die, right? That in the knowledge of, the understanding, not knowledge, the understanding of death allows you to live, to truly live. That remembering death, Memento Mori, is the only way to live. To bring death into the present moment, right? To not keep death, the death of this organism, as something mysterious that's going to happen 20, 30 years or tomorrow, right? Death will happen, right? We don't know when, it will. But this is what brings fear, because then we are afraid of this future event called death, the ending of us. And so we want to do something to stop that, but there's nothing you can do. You can't stop it. Nobody who's tried, no matter how many anti-aging things you try, or whatever secret religion you join, all those people have died. Everyone, and every cult and every religion that have not escaped death. Death is not something that can be escaped. And one of the greatest things Buddha did was die. The Buddha died, right? I think this is, people may say, well, people treat Buddha like a god. in some ways, maybe they do. But the reality is, in the Buddhist scriptures themselves, Buddha's death, and I think it was caused by him eating some bad meat, some rancid food or something that somebody gave him. You know, even though the Buddha was vegetarian, he would eat whatever was, he would never kill, never would allow an animal to be killed deliberately for them. That was their only rule, sort of, in a way. But if somebody had meat and they gave it to them, they would eat it, as long as the animal was not specifically slaughtered for them, for the purpose of them. They would not accept it otherwise. And I think he may have eaten some bad food, and, you know, he died. It's a terrible thing to accept that, right? That one of the greatest spiritual teachers, maybe, of this, but he was a human being. He was not a god. A human being who just saw clearly. We can all see clearly. We can all be Buddha, right? Everyone, because it just means to see. To be enlightened is just to see clearly, to not have delusions. It's nothing magical. It's to see the delusions in our life, is all. And there's nothing fantastic about that, but to see the delusions that we create. Right, so the Buddha was mortal. He died, he passed away. And some of his disciples and followers would sometimes say, well, where does the Buddha go when he dies? He said, where does the flame go of a candle when you snuff it out? Right, where does that flame go? And I think he tried to make clear that this is not, you know, there's not like a flame that exists in some spiritual realm. There's a flame that is a flame while it is a flame, and then when you put out the candle, the flame is not there anymore. It doesn't go anywhere, right? It ends. And you can light it again later, but there's an ending, and you have to see the ending, what ends and what doesn't end, right? Because there's an ending, but there's also, you know, a beginning. Every ending is a new beginning. So this whole flow, right, this is all interconnected, all interrelated. Everything we're talking about, right, impermanence and ethics and goodness and, you know, everything that we talked about today, which it's even hard for me to remember everything we talked about because it wasn't a plan. You know, a plan is the past trying to make the future like the past, right? When you plan things out, you're not allowing new things to happen because a plan is essentially memories that you're using to try to force the future to be a certain way, right? And instead of just letting the future be what it is, what it evolves, what it blooms into being. So again, to live without plans, without imposing upon yourself what the future may be, and to live free, not free of anything, just free from conditioning, the conditioning that makes you, that creates thought, the conditioning that is thought, right? Thought is conditioning. Thought is not free. So freedom from thinking, freedom from knowledge, freedom from the known is what we're talking about here. Not any particular thing, but freedom from all conditioning. And that is thought. So thought is a mechanical thing, but you can be free from thought. Not you can be free from thought. I can't say you, but there is freedom from thought. There is freedom from thinking. And the only way to understand that is to observe thinking. You don't imagine what it's like for thought to end. You must see thought for what it is. And in that seeing, there may be a transformation. There may be an awareness. There may be a beyond thought, beyond thinking. Or maybe that's where love and compassion are. And maybe that are not from thought, not derived from code of ethics. Ethics, goodness does not come from any thinking process, from any set of thoughts that you may regard as a code of ethics, as a religion, as a ritual, as a practice. Even meditation as a practice does not bring about goodness. There's nothing from thought that brings goodness. And it is not in thought. It's not contained by this limited partial activity of the brain, which is so ridiculous because it is a limited partial activity of the brain. How can it contain everything? How can it contain the immeasurable? How can what is small and finite contain the infinite? It can't. even reasoning, right, even thoughts that can only go so far tell you that that is not possible. But you can't stop there. You can't just look at this as an analytical process. You must look at it all, every bit of it, holistically, as a whole, not as a part. And that's why every time we speak about these things, we end up all over the place, because there is no containing it. There's no containing the truth and what the truth wants to say. The truth says what it wants to say. The future is what it wants to be, not what you want it to be, not what you plan it to be. So to plan what you even want to say. I don't plan what I say, because then again, I'm constraining truth. I let truth speak the way it wants to speak. And we don't need to speak. And we don't need any of this, right? None of this is required. This is just, in some sense, a demonstration of thought and thinking, and a demonstration of where it leads you and how it can lead you all over the place, right? But awareness and thinking leads you nowhere. It has no direction. There's no direction. It's directionless, right? Truth is. It's not a path. There's no path to truth. So all these, it just is. It's what is happening. It's what has happened. Like all of this are parts of the truth. They're just fragments, just tiny reflections of the truth. None of this is the whole truth. The whole truth cannot be spoken. The truth of another is a lie. Truth can only be observed directly, and not observed with the past interfering, not observed with the me, the self, the you, cannot be to see truth, because it colludes the truth. It distorts the truth. So there you go. I don't know where we went. I guess we went all over the place. It doesn't change that it's a beautiful day, and we did not come to any conclusion. There's no conclusion to come to. This is inquiry, right? Inquiry is, a different process from analysis. It's like we're following a stream, a stream of consciousness in a way, but even not just consciousness, because even consciousness, it comes from memory, from our senses. It's not awareness. Awareness can be pure, just to see without any interpretation or classification or anything, right? So, all right. It's funny. Sometimes I talk until I feel like the talking ends. There's nothing more to say today. Today's talking is over, at least about this. And, here we are. We've walked through this trail, I think, about 3 times. We're coming around, I think, on our 3rd time. And I can only imagine that means this is going to be a very long video. But, it's an enjoyable thing, to go to open yourself to truth, and let truth speak. Not speak to you, but let truth speak to you, directly. And then there is no wrong. There is no, when there is no center anymore, right? And the center is our sense of self, our ego, the center that causes us to be selfish and have selfish behavior, and say commit all the wrongs, if you want to look at it. All the wrongs, the wrong things that we do are the self-centered things that we do, right? It's one way to put it. And when there's no center anymore, when there's no self, there's no desire to do that anymore. And there's no need for rules then. There's no need for because there's no conflict, right? You don't have to look up in a book and say, well, I don't know what to do right now. It's like analysis paralysis. Like, I don't know what to do because I'm not sure what's right and I'm not sure what's wrong, and I'm afraid to make a move because it may be wrong and I'll go to hell. Or how do I know if something's right or wrong? Like, when you have to ask yourself those questions, you really have to go deeper and say, why are you asking the question, what's right and wrong? What are you afraid of? Because somebody's told you you're being judged. Somebody's told you that you go to heaven or hell, right? These ideas of heaven and hell if you make the wrong decisions. And it's not what it's about. And then people just don't understand that you don't need a system of code and ethics to be a good person. You know, that goodness is what is there when the self ends. There's nothing else beyond that. There's nothing that you need to know. There's no rules that you need to follow. There's nothing, you know? And that is nothingness. And in nothingness, there is nothing. Evil, bad, whatever. And the ending of that, the ending of the self, is what you might call goodness. Right? Goodness arises with the ending of the self, not through any deliberate actions of the self. See, and there it is, because you can be a do-gooder, right? It's a bit of a derogatory expression, but a do-gooder. It's one who does good out of self-serving or self-satisfying reasons, because they feel good, they get pleasure out of doing good. That's not good. It's not good to do things expecting a reward. You know, it reminds me of, even in the Bible, Jesus said, you know, when you pray, comb your hair and don't let others know you're praying, and when you do good things, don't make a show of it. My goodness, I don't know of anybody who doesn't make a show of it. They want everyone to know. If you do something that you think is good, and then you want to make a big stir about it, you want everyone to know you did that good thing. Why? If you want to do good, do good. You don't need to make a big deal about it. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to form a society, because all of that is ego-driven, right? You want to form that society, and you want your society to be the best society of all. You know, the best society of doing good, and you know, why do you just do good, right? You don't need to organize. You don't need to belong to anything. You don't need to join anything. You don't need to create anything, because those are all, again, human creations of the thought, perpetuation of the problem. Just don't act selfishly, you know? It's like there's nothing else. But that's not a commandment. It's not a, because if the self says, well, now I can't act selfishly, that's a rule, I gotta live by that rule, you're not seeing it. It's not do anything. It's just examine yourself. Examine who you are. And in that examination, not examining, again, examining requires the examiner, one who examines. It's a vicious cycle until you get out of the doer, the thinker, the actor, the decision maker, the one with free will. Just see who you really are. Know thyself, as Socrates put it. Really, though, not partly, but completely and wholly know who you are. And not know through knowledge. Know by looking, by observing, by just seeing, opening your eyes and seeing the truth about yourself, the truth of your impermanence, the truth of who you are, the truth of your memories, that you are a bundle of memories, and that you will end. So, all right, I think that's enough. I said that many times. I don't even know if we're still recording. Oh, yes, we are. 1 hour and 10 minutes, or 9 minutes. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad. I mean, I could have just talked into nothingness, and that would have been fine too. And but I guess it's nice in some sense that this is recorded. It has very little meaning. I mean, I'm going to walk in the shade here. A little hot out in the sun. The shade is nice. Yeah, it's nice, you know, and it's nice to come back from a walk and find a nice shaded little spot and not get all caught up in everything, and You know, even though we talked about a lot, or I said a lot, used a lot of words, it's time for the words to end, and the day will continue. So that's it for today, and we will reconvene our discussions at some other time. Okay, have a good day. Bye.